My name is Stephanie Walsh, I'm 28 years old, and I never thought my own mother would abandon me when I needed her most. I was sitting in my cubicle at Morrison Marketing when my phone buzzed with the school's number. The nurse's voice was tight with concern as she explained that my 7-year-old daughter Emily was burning up with fever and needed to be picked up immediately. My heart sank as I glanced toward the conference room where my boss was presenting to our biggest client. I dialed my mom's number with shaking fingers, praying she'd help me out just this once. But Helen Walsh's response cut through me like ice. I'm not your babysitter, Stephanie. Figure it out yourself. The line went dead, and my world started crumbling. Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you've ever felt let down by family when you needed them most. Make sure to subscribe because trust me, this story takes some unexpected turns that will leave you speechless. Now, let me tell you about the moment I discovered just how far my mother was willing to go to avoid helping her own granddaughter. The panic in Nurse Williams' voice still echoes in my mind as she described Emily's condition that Tuesday morning. Mrs. Walsh, Emily's temperature is 39.5 degrees, and she's been crying for you for the past hour, she explained urgently. She's shivering uncontrollably and complaining of a headache. We really need someone to come get her right away. I could hear Emily's weak voice in the background calling for Mommy, and my heart shattered into pieces. I was trapped between my responsibilities as a mother and my role as the marketing coordinator for Morrison Marketing, where I'd been working tirelessly for 3 years to prove myself worthy of the upcoming promotion. The timing couldn't have been worse. Mr. Harrison, my demanding boss, was in the middle of presenting our $2 million campaign proposal to Hartwell Industries, our most prestigious potential client. This was the project I'd poured my soul into for months, working late nights and weekends to perfect every detail. The presentation was scheduled to run until 4 in the afternoon, and my presence was crucial since I'd designed the entire digital marketing strategy. Missing this meeting would mean more than just disappointing my boss. It could cost me the senior marketing manager position I'd been desperately working toward. With trembling hands, I dialed my mother's number, hoping against hope that she'd understand the gravity of the situation. Helen Walsh answered on the third ring, her voice already tinged with irritation. What do you want, Stephanie? I'm busy right now. I quickly explained Emily's fever and my predicament at work, practically begging for her help. Mom, please, I know it's short notice, but could you possibly pick up Emily from school? She's really sick and I'm stuck in this crucial presentation. The silence that followed was deafening before her harsh response cut through my desperation. Absolutely not, Helen snapped coldly. I'm not your personal babysitter, Stephanie. You chose to have that kid, so deal with it yourself. I've raised my children already, and I'm not about to start raising yours too. Her words hit me like physical blows, each syllable dripping with resentment and contempt. But Mom, I pleaded, Emily is your granddaughter, and she's genuinely sick. This is just one time, and I promise I'll make it up to you somehow. Helen's laugh was bitter and cruel as she delivered her final verdict, not my problem. You made your bed when you decided to keep that baby, now lie in it. Frantically, I tried calling my usual babysitter, Mrs. Chen, but she was visiting her own grandchildren in another state. My neighbor Jennifer, who sometimes helped with Emily, had left that morning for a dental appointment. Every possible backup plan was falling apart as precious minutes ticked by and Emily remained sick and scared at school. The weight of being a single mother with no reliable support system crashed down on me as I realized I had no choice but to abandon my career responsibilities for my daughter's well-being. I gathered my purse and jacket with shaking hands, my mind racing with the consequences of leaving work during such a critical moment. As I hurried past the conference room, I caught Mr. Harrison's eye through the glass wall and mouthed "Family emergency," gesturing toward the exit. His face darkened with anger and disappointment, and I could see him making mental notes about my unreliability as I rushed toward the elevator. The drive to Emily's school felt like a funeral procession for my career ambitions, knowing that this single moment of putting my child first would cost me dearly in the corporate world. When I finally reached Lincoln Elementary, Emily was curled up in the nurse's office, her small body shivering despite the blankets wrapped around her. Her usually bright eyes were glazed with fever, and she reached out weakly when she saw me. "Mommy, I don't feel good," she whispered, and I scooped her into my arms, feeling the heat radiating from her tiny frame. Nurse Williams handed me Emily's backpack and a thermometer reading, explaining that the fever had spiked suddenly during lunch and hadn't responded to the children's acetaminophen they'd given her. The next morning brought the consequences I dreaded. Mr. Harrison called me into his office before the regular staff meeting, his face stern and unforgiving. "Stephanie, yesterday's departure was completely unprofessional and unacceptable," he began coldly. "Hartwell Industries specifically requested your presence for the digital strategy portion of the presentation, and your absence reflected poorly on our entire company." I tried to explain about Emily's high fever and my lack of childcare options, but he cut me off with a dismissive wave. "Personal problems cannot interfere with professional commitments at this level. Consider this an official warning, and I'm afraid the promotion you were hoping for is no longer on the table." The crushing weight of that moment still haunts me. 3 years of dedicated service, countless overtime hours, and innovative campaigns that had brought the company significant revenue meant nothing in the face of one emergency involving my sick child. I walked back to my desk feeling like I'd been punched in the gut, knowing that my mother's selfish refusal to help had cost me not just a day's peace of mind, but potentially my entire career trajectory. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who should have been my first line of support had instead become the architect of my professional downfall. Emily's condition worsened overnight, and by Wednesday morning her fever had climbed to 40.2 degrees, forcing me to rush her to Riverside General Hospital's emergency room. The pediatric doctor, Dr. Martinez, diagnosed her with mild pneumonia and prescribed a course of antibiotics along with strict instructions for monitoring her breathing and temperature. "Mrs. Walsh, Emily needs careful observation for the next 72 hours, Dr. Martinez explained seriously. Pneumonia in children can escalate quickly, so she cannot return to school until her fever has been completely gone for 24 hours without medication." The reality of Emily's diagnosis meant I would need to take at least 3 full days off work, possibly more depending on her recovery. When I called Mr. Harrison to explain the medical situation, his response was swift and punitive. "This is becoming a pattern of absenteeism, Stephanie. We're implementing immediate disciplinary measures including a 20% reduction in your salary and a formal notation in your employment file." The financial blow was devastating, as I was already struggling to make ends meet on my single income while paying for Emily's daycare, our apartment rent, and the mountain of medical bills from her father's death 2 years earlier. It was during Emily's second day home from school that our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, knocked on my door with a concerned expression. The 70-year-old widow had always been kind to Emily and me, often bringing over homemade cookies and offering gentle advice about single motherhood. "Honey, I hope you don't mind me saying this," she began hesitantly, "but I've been wondering about your mother's availability to help with Emily." When I explained that Helen had been too busy to assist with the emergency, Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Too busy?" Mrs. Peterson repeated carefully. "Stephanie, I don't mean to intrude, but I've seen your mother at the Silver Palace Casino every Tuesday for the past 2 months. She arrives around noon with her friend Dorothy in that red Buick, and they don't leave until well past dinner time." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt my stomach drop as the full extent of my mother's deception became clear. While I'd been desperately calling her for help with my sick daughter, Helen had been sitting in an air-conditioned casino, playing slot machines and having lunch with her gambling buddy. That evening, after Emily had finally fallen asleep with her breathing slightly improved, I confronted my mother over the phone about Mrs. Peterson's revelation. "Mom, were you really too busy to help me with Emily yesterday, or were you at the Silver Palace Casino?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the rage building inside me. Helen's immediate response was defensive and full of lies. "I don't know what that nosy old woman thinks she saw, but I was at the grocery store and then running errands all day. I'm not required to account for every minute of my time to you." but her story quickly unraveled as I pressed for details. Which grocery store, Mom? What errands were you running that were more important than your granddaughter's health? Helen stumbled through increasingly ridiculous explanations before finally snapping, "Fine. Yes, I was at the casino with Dorothy. So what? I'm 73 years old, Stephanie, and I deserve some fun and relaxation in my life. I've spent enough years taking care of other people's problems." The conversation exploded into a full-scale argument as years of resentment and disappointment came pouring out. "You deserve fun?" I shouted into the phone. "Emily was in the hospital with pneumonia, and you were playing slot machines. What kind of grandmother chooses gambling over her grandchild's health?" Helen's response revealed the depth of her selfishness and the toxic nature of our relationship. "You're an irresponsible mother who expects everyone else to clean up your messes. I raised my kids already, and I'm not about to sacrifice my golden years because you can't handle being a single parent." The accusations kept flowing from Helen's mouth like poison. I was manipulative, always expecting handouts, incapable of planning ahead, and fundamentally irresponsible for having Emily as a single woman. "You think the world owes you something because your husband died," she continued cruelly. "Well, newsflash, Stephanie, life is hard, and nobody else is responsible for your choices. I worked 2 jobs to raise you and your brother, and I never once asked my mother to drop everything and come running." That night, as I sat beside Emily's bed listening to her labored breathing, I made a decision that would change our lives forever. I would never again ask my mother for help, never again put myself in the position of being vulnerable to her rejection and cruelty. From that moment forward, Helen Walsh would be nothing more than Emily's biological grandmother, not the supportive family member I desperately hoped she could be. The woman who had given birth to me had chosen casino chips over her granddaughter's well-being, and I would not subject my daughter to any more of her toxic influence. The aftermath of Emily's illness and my forced absence from work created a domino effect of problems that seemed to multiply by the day. Mr. Harrison wasted no time in implementing his promised disciplinary measures, and by the following Monday, I found myself transferred from the marketing coordinator position to a junior associate role with significantly reduced responsibilities and a devastating 20% pay cut. The promotion I had worked toward for 3 years was officially given to my colleague Brian Matthews, despite his having less experience and fewer successful campaigns than me. "This demotion is necessary to ensure reliability in our senior positions," Mr. Harrison explained coldly during our meeting. "While we understand that personal emergencies occur, the frequency and timing of your absences demonstrate a lack of commitment to the company's priorities." The irony was bitter and cruel. My commitment to my daughter's health was being framed as professional weakness, while my colleagues who didn't have children or had stay-at-home spouses were praised for their dedication to the job. The financial impact was immediate and terrifying. With my reduced salary, I was suddenly unable to cover all our monthly expenses without dipping into my already depleted emergency fund. Emily's daycare costs remained the same despite my lower income, our rent was due regardless of my employment struggles, and the medical bills from her hospital visit added another layer of financial stress. I found myself lying awake at night, calculating and recalculating our budget, trying to figure out how to make ends meet without asking my mother for the financial help I knew she would refuse to provide. Emily's health struggles continued even after her pneumonia cleared up. Dr. Martinez explained that some children develop a pattern of frequent respiratory infections after a serious illness, and Emily seemed to fall into this category. She missed another full week of school in November with bronchitis, then had a severe flu bug in December that kept her home for 4 days. Each absence meant another awkward conversation with my boss, another day of missed pay, and another notation in my employment file about my attendance issues. The social isolation that followed was perhaps even more painful than the financial struggles. Other mothers at Emily's school, who had once been friendly and included me in playdates and social gatherings, began to distance themselves as I repeatedly had to decline invitations due to work obligations or financial constraints. The monthly book club I'd enjoyed was abandoned because the meetings were held during my new work hours. Weekend activities with other families became impossible when I picked up retail shifts at the local department store to supplement my reduced income. The situation with my extended family deteriorated rapidly as Helen began her campaign to paint me as the villain in our relationship. My uncle David, Helen's younger brother, called me on a Thursday evening with anger evident in his voice. "Stephanie, your mother is heartbroken about how you're treating her," he began, clearly having heard only Helen's version of events. "She tells me you've completely cut her out of Emily's life and refused to let her see her granddaughter. That's not the girl I helped raise." When I tried to explain the true circumstances of Helen's refusal to help during Emily's emergency and her subsequent lack of support, David dismissed my concerns as overreacting and holding grudges. "Your mother has her own life to live," he continued. "She's not required to drop everything whenever you need help. Maybe if you were more appreciative of what she has done for you over the years, she'd be more willing to help now." The conversation ended with David essentially taking Helen's side and suggesting that I owe my mother an apology for my disrespectful behavior. The psychological toll of being abandoned by my family while struggling as a single mother began to manifest in serious ways. I started experiencing panic attacks during quiet moments at work, sudden overwhelming fears that something would happen to Emily while I wasn't there to protect her. Sleep became elusive as my mind raced with worst-case scenarios and financial calculations. My appetite disappeared, and I lost 15 pounds over 2 months, surviving mainly on coffee and whatever Emily didn't finish at dinner. Dr. Sarah Chen, Emily's pediatrician, noticed the changes in me during one of Emily's follow-up appointments and gently broached the subject of my well-being. "Mrs. Walsh, parenting is incredibly challenging under the best circumstances, and you're handling some particularly difficult stressors," she said kindly. "Have you considered speaking with someone about the pressure you're under? Sometimes talking to a professional counselor can provide strategies for managing overwhelming situations." I appreciated her concern, but the reality was that therapy was another expense I couldn't afford, another hour away from work that I couldn't spare. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. The very person who should have been my primary support system during this crisis had become the source of additional stress and heartbreak. Helen's refusal to help hadn't just been a one-time disappointment, it had triggered a cascade of problems that affected every aspect of Emily's and my life. Her choice to prioritize casino visits over her granddaughter's health had cost me my career advancement, our financial stability, and my connection to the extended family I'd always believed would be there for us in times of need. As winter settled over our small town, I realized that Helen's actions had accomplished something I'd never thought possible. They had shown me exactly how alone Emily and I truly were in the world, and how little I could count on the people who claimed to love us when their help required genuine sacrifice. The next crisis struck on a bitter January morning when Emily was rushing to catch up with her classmates on the playground at Lincoln Elementary. I was finally starting to feel like we'd found our rhythm again after months of struggle when my phone rang at 10:30 with another call from Nurse Williams. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm sorry to bother you again, but Emily has had an accident on the playground," she explained with professional calmness that did nothing to ease my panic. "She fell from the monkey bars and has a deep cut on her forehead that's going to require stitches. She's conscious and alert, but she's asking for you, and we need someone to take her to the emergency room immediately." My heart sank as I looked around the Morrison marketing office, knowing that leaving work again would likely seal my fate with Mr. Harrison. I had barely survived the previous incidents, and my attendance record was already under scrutiny. But the thought of Emily scared and hurt, needing her mother, made the decision inevitable. Before leaving, I made one last desperate attempt to reach my mother, praying that perhaps this time would be different, that faced with her granddaughter's injury, Helen might show some compassion. The phone rang 4 times before Helen's voice answered, sounding relaxed and content. "Oh, Stephanie, what is it now?" she said with obvious annoyance, and I could hear classical music and the sound of running water in the background. I quickly explained about Emily's accident and the need for someone to take her for stitches. "Mom, I know I haven't asked for anything since Emily was sick, but she's hurt and scared, and I'm facing serious consequences if I leave work again. Could you please, just this once, help me out?" Helen's response was even colder than I'd expected. Absolutely not, Stephanie. If it's really that serious, call an ambulance. I'm not dropping everything every time you have a parenting crisis. The dismissive tone in her voice made my blood boil, but what I discovered next pushed me beyond anger into pure fury. What exactly are you doing that's so important? I demanded, my professional composure finally cracking completely. If you must know, I'm at the Serenity Day Spa with Dorothy, Helen replied smugly. We booked this package 2 weeks ago, and it cost me $200. I'm not walking away from my investment because you can't handle your responsibilities as a mother. The casual way she mentioned the spa appointment while her granddaughter needed medical attention revealed the true depth of her selfishness. $200 for a spa day while refusing to help with a child's emergency showed exactly where Helen's priorities lay. The confrontation that followed was explosive and long overdue. You spent $200 on a spa day but won't help your injured granddaughter? I shouted into the phone, no longer caring who in the office might overhear. What kind of grandmother are you? What kind of human being prioritizes a massage over a child who needs stitches? Helen's response showed that she had learned nothing from our previous arguments and had no intention of changing her selfish behavior. I'm the kind of grandmother who refuses to be manipulated by a daughter who uses her child to control and guilt-trip everyone around her, Helen shot back venomously. You're emotionally manipulative, Stephanie, and you're raising that little girl to be just as needy and demanding as you are. Every time you call me with one of these so-called emergencies, it's really just you trying to make me feel guilty for having a life of my own. The accusation was so far from reality that it left me speechless for a moment. Helen continued her attack. You deliberately chose to be a single mother, and now you expect everyone else to sacrifice their time and money to help you deal with the consequences of that choice. Well, I'm done enabling your poor planning and constant drama. The conversation ended with Helen hanging up on me, leaving me staring at my phone in complete disbelief at her cruelty. The aftermath of this second refusal was swift and brutal. My Uncle David called me that evening, having received Helen's version of events where she portrayed herself as the victim of my constant demands and manipulation. Stephanie, your mother called me in tears, David began accusingly. She says you're harassing her with phone calls every time Emily gets a scraped knee, and that you called her mentally unstable when she couldn't help you today. This has gone far enough. When I tried to explain that Emily had required actual medical treatment and that Helen was at a spa rather than dealing with any genuine emergency of her own, David dismissed my explanation as making excuses. Your mother has told us about your behavior over the past few months, he continued, and frankly, Susan and I are concerned about your mental state. Helen thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown, and maybe Emily would be better off staying with family who can provide a more stable environment. The implication that my fitness as a mother was being questioned sent chills down my spine. David continued, your mother is worried that you're becoming unstable and that it's affecting Emily's well-being. She's concerned enough that she's thinking about calling Child Protective Services to make sure Emily is in a safe environment. The threat was clear. If I continued to push back against Helen's selfishness and hold her accountable for her actions, she would retaliate by trying to have my daughter taken away from me. That night, as I sat beside Emily's bed looking at the neat row of stitches on her forehead, I realized that my mother had crossed a line from which there could be no return. Her refusal to help her injured granddaughter was bad enough, but her willingness to threaten my parental rights rather than acknowledge her own selfishness revealed a level of malice I'd never imagined possible. The woman who had raised me was actively working to destroy my life and separate me from my daughter, all to avoid admitting that her priorities were fundamentally wrong. The final blow to my already precarious situation came on a gray February morning when Mr. Harrison called me into his office for what I knew would be the end of my employment at Morrison Marketing. His face was stern and unsympathetic as he gestured for me to sit across from his imposing mahogany desk. Stephanie, this conversation has been inevitable for some time, he began formally. Your attendance record over the past 6 months has become completely unacceptable for someone in any position at this company, regardless of the personal circumstances involved. The termination paperwork was already prepared and waiting on his desk, a clear indication that this decision had been made well before our meeting. Effective immediately, your employment with Morrison Marketing is terminated due to excessive absenteeism and failure to meet basic job requirements, Harrison continued coldly. You'll receive your final paycheck covering work through yesterday, but given the circumstances of your termination, you're not eligible for severance pay or continued health insurance benefits. The words hit me like physical blows, each sentence destroying another piece of the future I'd been desperately trying to build for Emily and myself. Mr. Harrison, please, I began, my voice breaking with desperation. I know my attendance hasn't been perfect, but every absence has been due to genuine emergencies with my daughter's health. I've never missed work for frivolous reasons, and my performance when I am here has always been exceptional. He cut me off with an impatient wave, clearly eager to conclude what he saw as an unpleasant but necessary business decision. Personal circumstances, however valid, cannot excuse professional unreliability, Harrison replied dismissively. We've been patient and accommodating, but this company cannot continue to employ someone whose family obligations consistently interfere with their work responsibilities. Perhaps you should consider a career that's more compatible with single parenthood. The suggestion that my role as a mother made me inherently unemployable in the professional world was the final insult in an already devastating conversation. The walk to my desk to collect my personal belongings felt like a funeral march through a workplace where I'd invested 3 years of my life and professional ambitions. Colleagues I'd considered friends avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with witnessing my public termination but unwilling to risk their own positions by showing support. The small box of personal items that represented my entire professional life felt pathetically light as I carried it to my car, knowing that I was now completely without income and facing an uncertain future as an unemployed single mother. The financial reality of unemployment hit immediately and mercilessly. Within 2 weeks, I had burned through my remaining emergency fund trying to keep up with basic expenses. The rent on our apartment was due in 10 days, and I had no way to pay the $850 required to keep Emily and me from being evicted. Emily's daycare demanded payment weekly, and without it, I couldn't even look for employment opportunities since I had no one to watch her during interviews. The stress of our desperate situation began affecting Emily in heartbreaking ways that made my failures as a provider even more painful to witness. She started having nightmares about being taken away from me, waking up crying in the middle of the night and asking if we were going to have to live in our car like the homeless families she'd seen on television. Her anxiety manifested in school as difficulty concentrating and frequent tearful episodes that required calls from her teacher. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Foster, gently suggested that Emily might benefit from seeing the school psychologist to help process whatever instability she was sensing at home. "Mommy, why are you crying all the time?" Emily asked one evening as I sat at our kitchen table surrounded by unpaid bills and termination notices. Her innocent question broke my heart because I hadn't realized how much of my desperation and fear she'd been observing and absorbing. "Are we going to be okay? My friend Katie says her mom cries when they don't have enough money for things." The fact that my 7-year-old daughter was worrying about our financial survival instead of focusing on childhood concerns like toys and playground games showed how completely I was failing to protect her from adult problems. In a moment of absolute desperation, I swallowed what remained of my pride and called my mother one final time. "Mom, I know things have been difficult between us, but I'm facing eviction and unemployment," I began, hating myself for having to grovel to someone who had repeatedly shown her lack of care for Emily's well-being. "I'm not asking for a handout, just maybe a small loan to help us get through the next month while I find new employment. I'll pay back every penny with interest." Helen's response revealed new depths of cruelty that I hadn't thought possible even from her. "Oh, so now you want my help?" After months of calling me a terrible grandmother and cutting me out of Emily's life, she said with obvious satisfaction at my desperation. "Maybe if you publicly apologize for your disrespectful behavior and admit that you've been wrong about everything, I might consider helping you out. But first, you need to acknowledge that I've been a good mother and grandmother, and that your problems are entirely due to your own poor choices." The demand that I humiliate myself publicly and lie about Helen's behavior in order to receive help during a genuine crisis was more than I could stomach. "I won't apologize for standing up for Emily when you refused to help her," I replied firmly, despite my desperate circumstances. "I won't pretend that gambling at a casino while your granddaughter needed medical attention was acceptable behavior." Helen's laugh was cold and calculating as she delivered her final, most devastating blow. "Well then, I guess you'll just have to figure things out on your own," she said smugly. "But since you seem to think I'm such a terrible influence on Emily, maybe I should call Child Protective Services and let them know about your unstable housing situation and unemployment. After all, if you can't provide basic necessities like housing for that little girl, she might be better off with family members who have their lives together." The threat was delivered with such casual malice that it took my breath away, but Helen wasn't finished destroying what remained of my world. 2 days later, a social worker named Janet Morrison knocked on my apartment door with an official-looking clipboard and a sympathetic but professional demeanor. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm here to follow up on a report we received regarding potential child neglect and housing instability," she explained, showing me her credentials and a case file with Emily's name on it. "We received information suggesting that your daughter may be living in unsafe or inadequate conditions due to financial hardship and parental mental health concerns." The realization that my mother had actually followed through on her threat to involve Child Protective Services in our lives sent me into a state of panic that I struggled to hide from the social worker. Ms. Janet Morrison turned out to be a blessing in disguise, though I didn't realize it during those first terrifying moments of her visit. As she conducted her inspection of our apartment and interviewed both Emily and me, her experienced eyes quickly noticed inconsistencies in the report that had triggered the investigation. "Mrs. Walsh, I have to tell you that this case file contains some allegations that don't match what I'm observing here," she said carefully after completing her initial assessment. "Your home is clean and safe, Emily appears well cared for and properly fed, and there are no signs of the neglect or instability described in the complaint." Ms. Morrison explained that in her 15 years of social work, she'd learned to recognize when reports were motivated by personal vendettas rather than genuine concern for child welfare. "The person who filed this report made very specific claims about your mental state and housing conditions that simply aren't supported by evidence," she continued thoughtfully. "They suggested you were having psychotic episodes, that Emily was left unsupervised for long periods, and that your apartment was in deplorable condition. None of that appears to be true." What Ms. Morrison said next changed everything about my approach to dealing with Helen's attacks. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm going to give you some unofficial advice based on what I've seen in cases like this. If someone is filing false reports to harm you, they're likely engaged in other problematic behaviors as well. Have you noticed any unusual financial activity, missing documents, or other signs that this person might be acting against Emily's interests in ways beyond these false accusations?" Her question sparked a memory that had been nagging at me for weeks. Emily's father, Michael, had established a trust fund for her education before his death in a car accident 2 years earlier. As Emily's guardian, I was supposed to receive quarterly statements about the account's status, but I realized I hadn't seen any paperwork in several months. Michael's lawyer, Robert Kane, had always been meticulous about sending updates, so the absence of recent statements suddenly seemed suspicious rather than merely administrative oversight. "Ms. Morrison, there's a trust fund that was established for Emily's education," I explained hesitantly. "I should be receiving statements about it, but I haven't seen anything recently. Do you think someone could have accessed that account inappropriately?" Ms. Morrison's expression became very serious as she advised me to contact the bank immediately and request complete records of any activity on Emily's account over the past year. The phone call to First National Bank's trust department the following morning revealed information that left me speechless with shock and anger. According to the account representative, Helen Walsh had been listed as an alternate beneficiary on Emily's trust fund and had been making regular withdrawals over the past 8 months. "Mrs. Walsh, it appears that $23,000 has been withdrawn from your daughter's educational trust since June of last year," the banker explained professionally. The withdrawals were authorized by Helen Walsh using documentation that indicated the funds were needed for Emily's medical expenses and educational costs. The revelation that my mother had been stealing from her own granddaughter's future while simultaneously refusing to help with Emily's actual medical emergencies was breathtaking in its audacity and cruelty. I immediately requested complete records of all transactions and discovered a pattern of withdrawals that corresponded exactly with Helen's increased casino visits. Every Tuesday for nearly 9 months, she had taken between $2,000 and $3,000 from Emily's trust fund, then used that money to fuel her gambling addiction while claiming she was too financially strapped to help with genuine emergencies. Ms. Morrison's next suggestion proved invaluable in building a case against Helen's theft and deception. "Mrs. Walsh, you should contact the casino where your mother has been spending time and request information about her gambling activities," she advised. Many casinos keep detailed records of patron behavior, especially for frequent visitors. If your mother has been losing significant amounts of money there, they may be willing to cooperate with an investigation involving funds stolen from a child's trust account. The conversation with Silver Palace Casino's customer service manager, Frank Rodriguez, provided the final pieces of the puzzle that explained Helen's behavior over the past year. "Mrs. Walsh, your mother Helen has been one of our regular customers since last spring," Frank explained carefully. "I can tell you that her gambling losses have been substantial, well into the tens of thousands of dollars. She's actually been flagged by our responsible gaming department because of the amounts she's been losing and her increasingly erratic behavior when she's losing streaks." Frank revealed that Helen owed money to several other patrons after borrowing cash during particularly bad gambling sessions, and that the casino had been considering banning her due to disruptions she'd caused when demanding credit advances. "Your mother told several people here that she was supporting her unemployed daughter and sick granddaughter," Frank continued, "but given what you're telling me about stolen trust funds, it sounds like she's been lying about her financial situation to everyone involved." The final piece of the puzzle came when Dorothy Hendricks, Helen's casino companion, called me unexpectedly 3 days after my conversation with the casino manager. "Stephanie, I don't know if I should be telling you this, but I can't sleep knowing what Helen has done," Dorothy began nervously. "She told me that Emily's trust fund money was hers to use because she was helping raise Emily, and that you had given her permission to access it for emergencies. But after what happened with Emily's accident and Helen's refusal to help, I started to suspect that something wasn't right." Dorothy explained that Helen had lost over $40,000 gambling in the past year, far more than her Social Security income could support. "She's been desperate to win back what she's lost, and she kept saying that Emily's education fund was just sitting there earning nothing when it could be used to help her get back to even," Dorothy revealed reluctantly. "I never thought she was actually stealing from her own granddaughter. Helen made it sound like you were irresponsible with money and that she was protecting Emily's future by managing the account herself." Armed with bank records, casino documentation, and witness statements from Dorothy, I finally understood the true scope of Helen's betrayal. Her refusal to help during Emily's emergencies wasn't just selfishness, it was a calculated effort to avoid any scrutiny of her financial situation that might reveal her theft from her granddaughter's educational fund. She had stolen Emily's future to fund her gambling addiction, then portrayed herself as the victim when called upon to provide the most basic grandmotherly support during genuine medical crises. Armed with irrefutable evidence of Helen's theft from Emily's trust fund, I made the difficult decision to pursue legal action against my own mother. Robert Kane, Michael's lawyer who had originally established Emily's educational trust, was appalled when I showed him the bank records documenting $23,000 in unauthorized withdrawals. "Mrs. Walsh, this is a clear case of embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty," he explained gravely. "Your mother has not only stolen from her own granddaughter, but she's violated the legal terms of the trust agreement that specifically restricted use of these funds to educational expenses." Robert recommended a criminal defense attorney named Patricia Coleman who specialized in financial fraud cases involving family members. Patricia's initial consultation revealed the full extent of Helen's legal exposure and the strength of our case against her. Mrs. Walsh, your mother is facing potential criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and theft from a minor's protected account, Patricia explained during our first meeting. The amount involved, combined with the documentation you've provided, makes this a felony-level offense with serious consequences including possible jail time and mandatory restitution. The decision to file criminal charges against Helen wasn't made lightly, but the alternative was allowing her to escape consequences for stealing from Emily's future while continuing to portray herself as the wronged party in our family dispute. When the police served Helen with arrest warrants and a court summons, her reaction was predictably dramatic and manipulative. She immediately began calling every family member she could reach, spinning an elaborate story about being persecuted by her mentally unstable daughter who was using false accusations to hurt an innocent elderly woman. Helen's version of events painted me as vindictive and cruel, claiming that I was fabricating evidence to get revenge for her refusal to provide free childcare. Stephanie has completely lost her mind, Helen told anyone who would listen. She's so angry that I won't be her personal babysitter that she's making up stories about me stealing money. She's trying to destroy her own mother's reputation because she can't handle being a responsible adult. The manipulation was sophisticated and effective, initially swaying several family members who didn't have access to the actual evidence of her crimes. Uncle David and Aunt Susan fell completely for Helen's victim narrative, calling me repeatedly with angry demands that I drop the charges and apologize for my malicious prosecution of an innocent elderly woman. "Stephanie, this has gone way too far," David shouted during one particularly heated phone call. "Your mother is 73 years old, and you're trying to send her to prison over some accounting confusion. What kind of daughter are you?" When I tried to explain the concrete evidence of embezzlement, including bank records and casino documentation, David dismissed it as paperwork you probably manipulated to make your mother look bad. The family warfare escalated dramatically when Helen attempted to discredit me by creating false medical records suggesting that I had been treated for severe mental health issues. Working with a disreputable medical clerk named Tommy who owed money to loan sharks, Helen fabricated documentation claiming that I had been hospitalized for psychotic episodes and declared unfit to care for Emily. The forged documents were professionally printed on stolen letterhead from Riverside General Hospital and included detailed but completely fictional accounts of my supposed psychiatric treatments. Helen's plan was to present these fake medical records to Child Protective Services and the court as evidence that I was mentally unstable and therefore not credible in my accusations against her. She also planned to use the forged documents to support a custody petition that would place Emily in her care, effectively giving her legal access to the remainder of Emily's trust fund. The scheme was elaborate and would have been devastating if it had succeeded, but Helen made a crucial error in her desperation to destroy my credibility. The forged medical records contained several glaring inconsistencies that immediately raised red flags when Helen presented them to the court. The dates on the documents showed treatments that supposedly occurred during periods when I was verifiably at work, and the medical terminology was used incorrectly throughout the fabricated reports. Most damaging to Helen's scheme was the fact that she had forged the signature of Dr. Elizabeth Murphy, a psychiatrist who had been dead for 6 months at the time the fake treatments were supposedly provided. When Patricia Coleman showed the forged documents to Dr. Murphy's former colleagues, they immediately identified multiple errors that proved the records were fake, including medication names that were misspelled and treatment protocols that didn't exist. "Mrs. Walsh, your mother has made a serious tactical error," Patricia explained. "By attempting to introduce forged medical records into legal proceedings, she's committed additional felonies including fraud, forgery, and perjury. These charges carry much more serious penalties than the original embezzlement." The discovery of Helen's document forgery scheme finally opened the eyes of family members who had initially believed her victim narrative. When Uncle David learned that Helen had been willing to forge medical records to frame me for mental illness, his support for her evaporated completely. "Stephanie, I owe you a sincere apology," David said during an emotional phone call. "I had no idea your mother was capable of this level of deception and manipulation. What she's done to you and Emily is absolutely unforgivable." Aunt Susan's reaction was even stronger, expressing horror that Helen would steal from her own granddaughter's education fund to support a gambling addiction. "I feel sick that I believed her lies about you," Susan told me tearfully. "Helen painted such a convincing picture of being the victim of your mental instability, but the evidence of what she's really done is overwhelming. No grandmother who truly loved her granddaughter would steal from that child's future to fund casino visits." The preliminary court hearing in April was a complete disaster for Helen's defense, as the evidence of her crimes was overwhelming and irrefutable. Bank records, casino documentation, witness testimonies, and the forensic analysis of her forged medical records created an airtight case that her public defender couldn't challenge. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Michael Torres, described Helen's crimes as a deliberate and sustained campaign to defraud her own granddaughter while manipulating family members through false accusations and manufactured evidence. During the hearing, Helen's true character was finally exposed for all to see as she continued to blame everyone except herself for the consequences of her actions. "She accused me of being an unfit mother, claimed that Emily would be better off in foster care than with me, and insisted that she had every right to use the trust fund money because she was helping to raise Emily." The judge, Honorable Margaret Foster, was clearly appalled by Helen's lack of remorse and continued attempts to manipulate the proceedings even while facing serious criminal charges. The trial concluded in June with Helen's conviction on multiple felony counts including embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and attempted perjury. Judge Foster's sentencing reflected both the seriousness of Helen's crimes and her complete lack of remorse throughout the legal proceedings. "Mrs. Helen Walsh, you have betrayed the most fundamental trust that exists between generations," Judge Foster stated during sentencing. "You stole from your own granddaughter's future to fund a gambling addiction, then attempted to destroy your daughter's reputation through forged documents and false accusations when your crimes were discovered." Helen's sentence included 18 months of supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, mandatory participation in a gambling addiction treatment program, and full restitution of the $23,000 plus damages totaling $31,000. The judge also imposed a restraining order preventing Helen from having any unsupervised contact with Emily until she completed her probation and demonstrated genuine rehabilitation from her gambling addiction. Furthermore, Judge Foster continued, "The court is appalled by your continued attempts to manipulate these proceedings and blame others for the consequences of your criminal behavior. Your lack of accountability and remorse suggests that you pose a continued risk to your family's well-being." The criminal conviction meant that Helen would have a permanent felony record, affecting her ability to work with children or vulnerable populations and potentially impacting her Social Security benefits. The financial restitution provided Emily and me with the resources needed to rebuild our lives after months of struggle and uncertainty. I used part of the recovered funds to establish my own marketing consultancy, Walsh Creative Solutions, focusing on small businesses and nonprofit organizations that needed professional marketing services but couldn't afford large agency fees. The flexibility of running my own business meant I could be available for Emily's needs while still building a sustainable career that utilized my professional skills and experience. Emily's recovery from the trauma of our family crisis was gradual but steady with the help of child psychologist Dr. Amanda Rivera, who specialized in helping children process family dysfunction and instability. "Emily is remarkably resilient," Dr. Rivera explained during one of our sessions. "Children often recover more quickly than adults from family disruption when they feel secure in their primary attachment relationship, and it's clear that she feels safe and loved with you." The therapy sessions helped Emily understand that Helen's behavior was about Helen's problems, not about Emily being unworthy of love and protection. The changes in Emily's behavior and emotional state were remarkable once she felt secure again. Her nightmares about being taken away disappeared, her anxiety about money problems diminished, and her natural curiosity and joy began to return. She started excelling in school again, made new friends, and even began asking questions about potentially participating in after-school activities that we could now afford. "Mommy, are we going to be okay now?" she asked one evening while we were making dinner together. "Yes, sweetheart," I replied with confidence I hadn't felt in months. "We're going to be just fine." Uncle David and Aunt Susan made sincere efforts to repair their relationship with Emily and me, acknowledging their mistake in initially supporting Helen's lies. "Stephanie, we should have trusted you from the beginning," David said during one of their visits. "We've known you your whole life, and we should have realized that the person Helen was describing wasn't the niece we raised and loved." Their support during the trial and its aftermath helped Emily and me feel reconnected to the positive aspects of our extended family. The broader family consequences of Helen's crimes were significant and lasting. Her gambling addiction and willingness to steal from her own granddaughter destroyed relationships that had taken decades to build. Dorothy Hendricks and other casino acquaintances distanced themselves completely once Helen's true character became known. Helen's bridge club expelled her after learning about the criminal conviction, and several longtime friendships ended when the full scope of her deception was revealed. Helen's attempts at reconciliation during the probation period were transparently self-serving and focused on minimizing consequences rather than expressing genuine remorse. Her court-mandated letters of apology were formulaic and defensive, containing phrases like "I'm sorry you feel hurt" rather than accepting responsibility for her actions. When she called requesting to see Emily for Christmas, her conversation quickly devolved into complaints about her community service requirements and suggestions that Emily and I owed her forgiveness because family should stick together. The restraining order and supervised visitation requirements meant that Helen couldn't use emotional manipulation to re-establish control over our lives, giving Emily and me the space needed to heal and move forward. Her probation officer, Maria Santos, reported that Helen remained resistant to treatment and continued to minimize her gambling addiction while blaming others for her legal troubles. Mrs. Walsh shows little insight into the harm her actions caused her family, Maria explained during a court review hearing. She continues to view herself as the victim of circumstances rather than accepting responsibility for her choices. By the end of the year, Emily and I had established new holiday traditions and social connections that didn't include Helen's toxic influence. We hosted Thanksgiving dinner for Uncle David and Aunt Susan, creating positive family memories without the tension and manipulation that had characterized previous gatherings. Emily's laughter during our holiday preparations reminded me how much joy had been missing from our lives when we were constantly walking on eggshells around Helen's unpredictable moods and demands. The business I'd built was thriving, with several steady clients who appreciated both my professional expertise and my reliable, family-centered approach to work-life balance. The flexibility of entrepreneurship allowed me to attend Emily's school events, volunteer for field trip chaperoning, and be present for the ordinary moments of childhood that I'd been forced to miss during my corporate employment. "You seem so much happier now, Mommy," Emily observed one afternoon while I was working on a client proposal at our kitchen table. She was right, I felt more genuinely content than I had in years. 6 months after Helen's sentencing, Emily and I had settled into a life that felt stable, peaceful, and authentically our own for the first time since Michael's death. My consulting business had grown to the point where I was earning more than my previous corporate salary while maintaining the flexibility to be present for Emily's needs. The irony wasn't lost on me that Helen's betrayal, devastating as it had been, ultimately forced me to build a career that was more compatible with single motherhood than anything I could have achieved in a traditional corporate environment. Emily's transformation was perhaps the most rewarding aspect of our recovery. She had blossomed into a confident, articulate 8-year-old who no longer carried the weight of adult anxieties that had marked her behavior during our crisis period. Her report cards showed consistent improvement in both academic performance and social interaction, and her teacher, Mrs. Jennifer Brown, commented on Emily's increased participation in class discussions and group activities. "Emily has really come out of her shell this year," Mrs. Brown told me during parent conferences. "She seems much more secure and self-assured than she was last fall." The new friendships I developed through Emily's school and extracurricular activities provided the supportive community network that Helen's family had never offered. The moms group I joined, led by fellow single mother Tracy Williams, created a safe space for sharing challenges and celebrating successes without judgment or competition. These women understood the unique pressures of single parenthood and offered practical support as well as emotional encouragement during difficult moments. It's amazing how much easier parenting feels when you have people who actually want to help, I told Tracy during one of our monthly coffee meetings. She nodded with understanding, sharing her own experiences with family members who created drama rather than providing support. The hardest lesson I learned was that being related to someone doesn't automatically make them good for your children, Tracy replied thoughtfully. Sometimes protecting your kids means protecting them from family members who claim to love them but consistently act against their best interests. Helen's isolation had become increasingly complete as the long-term consequences of her actions continued to unfold. Her gambling addiction remained untreated despite court-mandated counseling, and she had accumulated new debts that forced her to sell her house and move into a small apartment across town. The friends who had once enjoyed her company at social events distanced themselves after learning about her criminal conviction and the circumstances surrounding her theft from Emily's trust fund. The final confrontation between Helen and me occurred on a rainy October afternoon when she appeared unexpectedly at my office, having apparently been waiting for an opportunity to approach me without violating the restraining order's restrictions. She looked older and more frail than I remembered, but her eyes still held the same manipulative gleam that I'd learned to recognize and distrust. "Stephanie, we need to talk about this ridiculous situation," she began without any greeting or acknowledgement of the boundaries she was violating by approaching me. "I've served my community service and attended those useless counseling sessions," Helen continued, as if these court-mandated consequences were favors she had performed for my benefit. "It's time to put this whole misunderstanding behind us and start acting like a real family again. Emily needs her grandmother in her life, and you need to stop poisoning her mind against me with your version of events." Her words revealed that she had learned nothing from the legal proceedings or the therapy she'd been required to attend. When I pointed out that she had never once apologized for stealing from Emily's education fund or acknowledged that her actions had caused genuine harm, Helen's facade of reasonableness quickly crumbled. "I was trying to help secure Emily's future by making that money grow instead of letting it sit uselessly in a bank account," she insisted, repeating the same justifications she'd used during the trial. "Everything I did was motivated by love and concern for my granddaughter's well-being, but you're too selfish and vindictive to see that." The conversation ended with my clear statement that Helen would have no place in our lives until she demonstrated genuine remorse and significant behavioral change, neither of which seemed likely given her continued refusal to accept responsibility for her actions. "Emily and I have built a good life without your manipulation and drama," I told her firmly. "We don't need the kind of love that involves theft, lies, and threats to destroy our family. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." That evening, as Emily and I prepared dinner together in our comfortable kitchen, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the peace we'd found after so much turmoil. Emily chatted excitedly about her upcoming school play, her friend's Halloween costume plans, and a science project she was working on with her study group. The ordinary happiness of these conversations reminded me of everything Helen's toxic presence had stolen from our daily life and everything we'd regained by setting firm boundaries around her behavior. The most important lesson I'd learned through this painful experience was that family relationships require mutual respect, genuine care, and willingness to prioritize children's well-being over personal convenience or destructive habits. Helen's claim that family bonds excused her selfish behavior had been a manipulation tactic designed to maintain access to victims rather than an expression of genuine love. True family support means being present during crises, making sacrifices when necessary, and acting in children's best interests even when it's inconvenient or costly. "Mommy, do you think Grandma Helen will ever want to be nice to us?" Emily asked one evening while we were reading together before bedtime. Her question was thoughtful rather than anxious, suggesting that she had processed Helen's absence in a healthy way. "I don't know, sweetheart," I answered honestly. "Sometimes adults make choices that hurt their families, and it takes a lot of work to fix those problems. But what I do know is that we have lots of people who love us and take good care of us, and that's what really matters." Emily nodded with the wisdom that children sometimes display when they've been through difficult experiences and emerged stronger. "I'm glad it's just us most of the time," she said contentedly. "Our house feels happy and safe, and I like that." Her words captured exactly what I'd been striving to create, a home environment where love meant protection and support rather than manipulation and conditional affection. As I reflect on this journey from crisis to stability, I'm struck by how much I've grown as both a mother and an individual. The woman who once desperately called her mother for help during Emily's medical emergencies has been replaced by someone who builds her own support systems, protects her child from toxic influences, and refuses to accept treatment that diminishes her worth or threatens her family's well-being. Helen's betrayal taught me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined and more capable of providing for Emily's needs than I'd previously believed. The business I built serves as daily proof that necessity truly is the mother of invention. Being forced to create income streams that accommodate Emily's needs led to a career that's more fulfilling and financially rewarding than any corporate position I'd held. The clients I work with appreciate my dedication and reliability, and several have become friends who genuinely care about Emily's and my well-being. This professional success, built from the ashes of Helen's sabotage, demonstrates that adversity can become opportunity when approached with determination and creativity. Tonight, as I tuck Emily into bed and listen to her prayers of gratitude for our home, her school, her friends, and our family, I'm reminded that the most valuable inheritance we can give our children isn't money in a trust fund, but the knowledge that they are loved unconditionally, protected fiercely, and worthy of relationships that honor their dignity and support their growth. Helen's theft of Emily's education fund was devastating, but her greater crime was attempting to model a version of love that was selfish, manipulative, and ultimately destructive. The family we've chosen and created for ourselves, including Uncle David and Aunt Susan who learned from their mistakes, Tracy's mom's group, Emily's chosen aunties from my client network, and the genuine friends who show up during both celebrations and crises, provides Emily with a foundation of healthy relationships that will serve her throughout her life. She's learning that love looks like presence during difficulties, celebration of successes, and consistent respect for boundaries and feelings. As I write these final thoughts, I want to leave you with the most important lesson this experience taught me. Family is not an excuse for abuse, manipulation, or selfish behavior. True love supports and protects, it doesn't exploit or manipulate. Children deserve adults who prioritize their well-being over personal convenience. And sometimes protecting our children means protecting them from family members who claim to love them but consistently act against their best interests. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who claim to love you but consistently acted against your best interests? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for our children is to show them what healthy relationships look like, even if it means disappointing people who claim to care about them. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with others who might benefit from knowing they're not alone in facing family dysfunction. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and building stronger families through authentic love and support. Thank you for taking this journey with Emily and me, and remember that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is the courage to choose love that truly protects and nurtures them. I hope your families are filled with the kind of love that shows up when it matters most and supports you through life's unexpected challenges.